Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Pump House's series of Artist Talks. My name is Olivia, and I'm the gallery coordinator here at the Pump House Art Center. And today I am joined by Tiana Traffas, whose exhibition, The Tea Drawings, is in our front gallery through April 12th, 2025. So thank you so much for joining me, Tiana.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Of course. And why don't we just dive right into your experience in the arts and how long you've been creating?
Yeah, so I'm totally self-taught, other than, the normal art classes that you go through in school, which I was so grateful to have. And I had some really great art teachers growing up. But yeah, I've made art for as long as I can remember. That's kind of the first label that, was kind of put upon me. And for a long time, I felt like, am I worthy enough to call myself an artist? But, I was just overthinking it. I make art, so I'm an artist. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And have you always been mainly focused in drawing and graphite, or have you explored in other mediums as well?
Yeah. I've always loved drawing. That's kind of my main thing. I'll always go back to it, but I work with a lot of different mediums and always kind of have wanted to dabble and play and try new things. But drawing is kind of, I think, my strength. And so everything kind of starts from drawing, even if it becomes something else. Um, but yeah, I've always loved drawing, especially people. Um, yeah, it's always been drawing pretty much. But yeah, I'll work with watercolors, India inks, um, even unconventional materials, which we'll talk about later. But yeah, it's always been drawing for me.
Well, as we move into the tea drawings, could you give us a little bit of background on the inspiration for this series?
Yeah, so um, again, I've always loved drawing people and I love women and I love clothing. I love accessories. I always have lots of jewelry on and I'm always drawn to handmade textiles and the more unique the better, and I love vintage clothing. I was really big into vintage Vogue on Fifth Street. As soon as I got a driver's license, I was there every weekend trying to find the coolest, weirdest stuff I could find. And so this series of work is really inspired by my love of adornment and expressing yourself through clothing. That's a huge part of this series. Um, yeah, so you'll see lots of different textures and patterns in the clothing that they're wearing. And some of the pieces I will reference my own closet to see how the fabric drapes, or there's a coat in this series that is modeled after one of my coats that I found in a thrift shop for $50. So yeah, there's a lot of fun stuff. And then I also one of my other big passions is herbal medicine, and I'm not a super skilled herbalist. It's really kind of folk herbalism at its finest, which is eating your backyard weeds. So the tea drawings are inspired by my love of plants and my relationship to the plants, and so they're stained with um, local local plants, and that's where the tea drawings come from.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for the background information and inspiration. Let's get into some of the specific pieces in the show. First one here, walk and talk. It's the herbal tea. One thing that I really enjoy about your show is that across difference the specific type of tea you used. So that's one perk of coming to see the work in person is seeing the different types of tea used. Um, but why don't we get into this piece? Is there any additional information you'd like to give us on this work?
Yeah, so this is probably one of my favorites, although I get kind of emotionally attached to everything that I make. But this one is just obviously really inspired by the power of female friendship. And I have that coat essentially. That's my vintage Mongolian fur coat. And I know fur, like, I'm not buying new fur, but if I find a vintage fur coat. That thing will outlive me if I take good care of it, and it's going to keep me really warm. So when I found this coat for $50 in a thrift store, you knew it's going home with me. I need to have it. So that's what her coat is inspired by. And I also have a gorgeous wool poncho, like the one that the other woman in this image is wearing. And I just love to play with those, getting those really, really dark, almost inky looking blacks. My favorite thing is trying to capture that shadow and light, and playing with all the folds and all the textures and the fringe and different patterns that you see, even just a little bit of pattern kind of peeking out of her coat on her skirt there, or the stripes on the bag and the texture of that woven purse. I mean, all of that is so exciting and challenging and fun to me. So yeah, and then the tea is usually on the back of the work, I'll write down what plants ended up staining the paper that day. But I love how it kind of just blooms and spreads in its own way, and you kind of never know exactly what you're getting. And I like that there's almost this little halo around the woman in the poncho from a little bloom of tea. So yeah, that's the inspiration behind this piece.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. On with blooms and stripes. One of my specific questions about your process is, are you adding the tea before you do any drawing or mapping out of the composition? And how long and how much tea do you saturate the paper with?
Yeah, that's a really great question. It is different every time. Sometimes I will, so it starts with the tea. It starts with brewing just, a nice jar of tea. And sometimes it's tea that I've gathered, or leaves that I've gathered myself and dried. Sometimes it's like, oh no, I kind of forgot about this box store bought tea in the back of the cupboard and I don't want it to go to waste. That's kind of how this whole process started, is I found an expired box of tea and I felt guilty about it. So I, incorporated that tea into my art making process. I will usually do a nice strong brew, uh, which is a process called infusion. So it's making tea the traditional way, but letting it steep overnight in the refrigerator. So it gets nice and dark and super potent medicine if that's what you're looking for. But I'm usually looking for some really great color. So this particular piece I did in a few different layers. Sometimes the tea is nice and dark and it takes one coat and I let it air dry. Sometimes I will do several coats of tea to get a nice deep dark color. And then sometimes I'll let the tea dry and then I'll go back in and kind of wet the paper again and then splatter it. Well, it's kind of, halfway dried, and that creates these beautiful blooms, these sort of little bursts of color that you can see really well in this piece, which it's named for the stripes in her outfit and also the blooming sort of almost, growing pattern that's created by how the tea dried. So that process is really fun and it kind of gets me out of my own head. Sometimes I can get intimidated by the big white sheet of paper, and now it's this chaotic, already messed up, organic feeling to it. So it always starts with the tea, and I stain it at the beginning. And once it dries, then I feel like I'm ready to start sketching out and, compiling different reference images, looking in my own closet for inspiration. And with this one specifically, I really loved the challenge of, she's got this beautiful braided belt. She's kind of draped in all this fabric. So there's so many folds that I have to get in and figure out with my pencil. And I've really had kind of an obsession for the longest time with drawing people in headscarves. I don't know why. I just think it's really fun to get in there and yeah, figure out all those folds. So I like that kind of a challenge.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, I mean, all of these, most of them are portraits in a way, but the focus is so much more than just the face or faces of these individuals. It's the clothing and the patterns and everything. I think that's what makes your work so strong and exciting because every time you look at a piece again, you see different textures and hidden gems almost in all of your pieces. Thank you so much. Moving on, we have dimples and stretch marks. Could you give us a little bit around in creating this work and the other works like it in the show?
Yeah, so um, all of the nude figurative work in the show has these really a lot of movement. The figures are stagnant and sort of just suspended in space, but all of these marks around the figures I will make after the tea, but before the drawing. And this is, again, incorporating a sense of movement into the pieces and also kind of getting out of my own way. Because, like I said, sometimes I will just get a little thrown off by staring at the big white sheet of paper. And this is a way for me to kind of incorporate more abstraction into my work. And these are created with um, by dipping plant matter, dried plant matter into ink and sort of swirling it. And again, that chaos of kind of not knowing how things are going to come out and just having a sense of play. And some of those really larger, streaks of ink are created by dipping the smooth end of a piece of obsidian that I picked up literally out of my in-laws' backyard on a rainy day. Every time it would rain in their Northern California town, all of this gorgeous ancient obsidian would kind of be birthed up out of the ground. And so I loved just treasure hunting in their yard. And this piece of obsidian has this smooth, rounded edge that I can kind of just scrape across the paper. And I really enjoy that process. And then another thing that I think is super important to me about these pieces, especially the nude ones, is that the women are not sort of performing for someone else. They're not sexualized, or they're not looking at the viewer in a certain way. They're just kind of existing in the moment. And depictions of women in art, especially if they're naked, are usually kind of disappointing or overly sexualized. Or so my process with these is kind of wanting to show all the things that people profit off of us hating about ourselves. So there's body hair, stretch marks, dimples, all of the things that sagging and rolls, and I mean all these things that are really kind of beautiful to look at, I think. But you don't often see them in art, and it's so important to me to show that. And it's really interesting to see all of the different reactions to it. So yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely been very powerful to have in our gallery so far, and there's been lots of excitement exhibition specifically. So I think it's definitely very important. I'll highly recommend everyone coming and seeing the rest of this exhibition. Moving on, we have this next piece, brown paper bag. Is there anything specific you would like to share with us about this work?
Yeah, this one has a little bit of a green hue to it. One of my favorite plants to work with artistically, but also with my own body, is nettle, stinging nettle. I have a very small little patch that my neighbor keeps trying to kill, which I think, it's very nice of him, because he thinks, oh, well, you have a kid, and this is a very irritating plant if you get yourself caught up in it. So I appreciate the kindness of it, but I'm like, no, please, I eat those, but it makes this gorgeous green, almost like a swampy green, but if you hold it up to the light, it really glows in this gorgeous, gorgeous color. So there are several that you'll see. If there's a greener hue and less of an antique color, that's usually nettle showing up on the paper. But I really love this piece because there's so much in her eyes. I just think she has such a presence about her. And I wanted to share this piece specifically because I think she captures that kind of energy that a lot of the other pieces do too, which is this kind of, yeah, just a presence about them, a sort of expression. They're expressing themselves through their clothing, but they're also taking part in a lot of, their passions. If it's wildcrafting, or we have a lot of dancing, and there's guitar playing and reading and all kinds of things happening in these um, pictures of these women. And this one has, yeah, a lot of texture, a lot of shadows going on. We've got the shadow below her hair. You can see her curls playing on her shirt. And then the necklace, we've got it kind of creating this really interesting shadow below her belt and onto her skirt. And that's the stuff that I really, really love. Um, I love drawing it. It's a challenge, and sometimes it makes me feel like, oh, why do I do this to myself? But at the end of the day, I always feel really good when I have all of these deep dark blacks and all of these shadows kind of, you know, overplaying the pattern. Like in her skirt, she's got this great striped skirt. So yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah, you mentioned of the other works in this show are women doing kind of like their everyday hobbies or anything, which is something I also really like. Not often are the women in them make contact with you, which is just something I find very interesting and enjoyable. So thank you for sharing. Moving on, we have Dazed Dance. Is there specific things you'd like to share with us about this work?
Yeah, I think a huge part of my process in creating art is music selection. I can't work on something without having the right mood kind of set by music. And a lot of times, if I haven't been keeping up with my art practice, which art is always a practice, you kind of have to show up. You can allow yourself to ebb and flow, but if I'm not always working on something, I kind of fall out of that practice and will have to kind of restart myself. And my restart in my earbuds, cranking up the music, and just allowing myself to kind of move intuitively to that music. And I am not a professional dancer. I would never dance in front of anybody. But when I'm alone in my studio, I'm going to kind of get that energy out. And then I feel like I'm ready to work. And if I'm, hours and hours of drawing, I'll step back, I'll start feeling it, whatever I'm listening to, and then I'll take a little dance break. So that's a huge part of my process. And I really love the way we just find this woman kind of in her own zone. She's just enjoying being in her body and moving to the music. And I think this skirt is also a very good example of what I love about handmade clothing, vintage clothing, just some really fun pattern and texture going on in here. And that was really a fun thing to draw. So yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, I highly recommend that everyone come see the rest of this show in person. It's powerful and exciting and so visually pleasing. So thank you so much, Tiana, for sharing this work with us. You can see this in our front gallery through April 12th, 2025. And is there anything else you would like to mention or anything you would like the audience to keep in mind when viewing your work in person?
Yeah, I think something that I really care about in art is, or the art that I make is, um, keep in mind the normal archetypes that you see women depicted as when you look at my series. Um, we often see the sort of exploitable maiden, uh, and this goes for in visual art and film, whatever. You're always going to see these sort of archetypes that sort of have some sense of control over the way women are depicted. And I hope that my pieces, you see something else, that if you see the body of an older woman in my work, it's not this sort of crone that is cast aside or um, feared. That if you see a mother, she's empowered and complex. And if you see a young woman, that she has a sense of self. And, there's all these complicated archetypes that we're constantly coming across in our everyday lives and also in the visual arts world. And I hope that these will kind of help you embrace the sort of complex, parts of yourself, that maybe you can love yourself a little more looking at these pieces, because that is huge to me. And also to go to the pump house because it's such a great place and we're really lucky to have it.
Well, thank you so much for sitting down with me today, Tiana, and process. And thank you, everyone, for watching.
Thank you so much, Olivia.